Darwin entered a state of deep tension as Cyclone Fina swept across the northern coastline, forcing the city and the surrounding top-end region into a night of relentless wind and rising water. The storm strengthened rapidly over the warm seas to the north before making its closest pass to the urban area, carrying the force of one of the strongest systems to approach the region in many years. As warnings escalated, households across Darwin braced for a long night defined by sound, pressure, and the unpredictable power of a tropical cyclone. Through the early evening hours, the system pushed a wall of rotating wind toward the coastline. The gusts continued to build as the outer bands tightened, and by the time the center of the storm approached its nearest point, destructive winds were estimated at roughly 200 kilometers per hour. The air pressure dropped steadily, houses trembled as the storm intensified, and the darkness outside shifted with each surge of wind. Rain swept sideways across windows and walls, carried by the roaring current of air that moved across the region with unbroken momentum. As the cyclone deepened, communities across Darwin faced conditions that changed within minutes. Trees bent in long arcs before snapping. Branches, sheets of metal, and roofing materials lifted into the air and struck nearby structures. In several suburbs, fences collapsed as water filled yards and low points in the terrain. The sound of the wind carried through every neighborhood, described by many residents as a long and continuous roar that reverberated through buildings. During the most intense period of the night, the city's infrastructure struggled to withstand the persistent strain. Numerous trees were uprooted entirely, leaving wide craters in the softened ground. Power lines fell, and transformers overloaded as cables were dragged down by debris. Roofs across older districts tore loose or were partially removed by rushing gusts. Emergency lines received a surge of calls, with reports of structural failures, blocked exits, and hazardous debris moving across streets. Crews were unable to respond to many of these incidents due to the dangerous conditions, as the wind remained too strong for rescue operations or utility repair. Large sections of the region lost electricity as the grid shut down to prevent further damage. Utility teams attempted to assess the extent of the outage, but the rapid shifts in wind speed and flying debris forced them to halt operations and take shelter. When daylight began to emerge, the magnitude of the destruction became visible. Yards were covered with torn branches. Streets were layered with fragments of roofing and pieces of metal siding. Pools of standing water filled driveways, drains, and low-lying intersections. One of the most concerning incidents occurred when a section of a hospital roof gave way under the combined force of the wind and driving rain. Although no injuries were reported, the collapse raised concerns about the storm's intensity and the strain placed on critical facilities. Several residential homes also sustained heavy structural damage, particularly in older neighborhoods and areas situated near lower ground, where wind exposure and water accumulation were more severe. Local authorities issued clear warnings not to go outside or attempt early inspections, emphasizing the possibility of hidden hazards such as unstable trees, weakened support beams, and fallen power lines. Even as the center of Cyclone Fina shifted westward, the danger for Darwin persisted. The system retained strong convection and continued to produce heavy rainfall. Drainage systems struggled to keep pace with the volume of water entering the network, prompting alerts about possible flash flooding in vulnerable suburbs. Rural properties on the outskirts of the city also faced rising water levels as creeks swelled and channels overflowed. Coastal areas remained at risk of storm surge effects, which were unpredictable due to shifting wind directions and tidal changes. Authorities advised residents to stay away from waterways and flooded corridors as conditions remained unstable. Emergency shelters offered refuge to those whose homes had become unsafe or uninhabitable during the night. Across the city, people supported one another as communications stabilized. Neighbors checked in on nearby households when the wind briefly calmed, and many families waited together in reinforced rooms, listening closely to the movement of the storm as it passed overhead. With the most destructive winds beginning to ease, cleanup operations slowly moved into place. Road crews assessed blocked intersections, while emergency teams began mapping damaged structures and identifying the most critical hazards. In several neighborhoods, large trees were overturned with roots exposed. Some of these trees were decades old and had been considered stable fixtures of their communities. Their removal required careful coordination due to risks of tension in the fallen trunks and branches. The cyclone's outer bands continued to bring heavy rainfall across parts of the region, and officials warned that the system could intensify again over the sea to the west. Forecast models suggested that additional areas might face severe weather in the coming days, as Fina tracked further across open water. Residents across Darwin reflected on the strength of the storm, which drew comparisons to historic cyclones that have shaped the region's collective memory. Modern building standards and early alerts contributed to a reduction in casualties, yet the physical destruction and emotional strain remained profound. Families spent the night hearing the steady impact of debris across walls and roofs. Some monitored structural sounds as their homes shifted under the force of the wind, listening for signs of damage or breach. When morning revealed the debris outside, the focus shifted from endurance to recovery. The next 1 to 2 days were expected to center on restoring power, clearing blocked roads, and securing weakened buildings. Emergency teams prepared for an increase in damage reports as more communities became accessible. Even though the cyclone's core had moved away from Darwin, the weather pattern remained unstable. Additional rainfall was possible as lingering moisture from the system continued to circulate over the region. The message from authorities remained direct. Stay cautious, stay indoors unless necessary, avoid flooded areas, keep clear of fallen lines, and follow official updates closely. Cyclone Fina underscored the continuing need for strong infrastructure, storm-ready planning, and community cooperation in northern Australia. As the region entered the recovery phase, volunteers and local organizations began assisting families who had been displaced or whose homes had sustained heavy damage. Temporary relief hubs distributed clean water, basic supplies, and a safe environment for residents waiting for structural assessments. Many residents described feeling emotionally exhausted after the long night, and support teams prepared for a rise in requests for assistance. Despite the overwhelming force of the storm, the community demonstrated resilience. People worked together to clear debris, share information, and help neighbors secure unsafe properties. In the wake of one of the strongest storms to strike the region in recent years, Darwin began the long process of rebuilding with cautious optimism and collective determination.